Coming up today, Korea's rival political parties swear off over President Park Geun-hye's plans to reform 4 key sectors. The ruling party throws its support behind her plans, but the main opposition accuses the president of avoiding the key issues. Korea's finance minister unveils the latest tax code revisions aimed at reducing youth unemployment and funneling extra tax revenue into the government's coffers. First, North Korea comes out swinging at the ASEAN Forum, saying its nuclear weapons program is here to stay because the US is hell-bent on destroying the regime. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello and welcome. It's 6 a.m. on Friday, August 7th. Here in Seoul, I'm Mark Broome and you're tuned in to our early morning edition of Arirang News. And we start with President Park Geun-hye's special address to the nation, in which she laid out her plans for running the country over the remainder of her 5-year term. In a televised speech on Thursday, the president placed strong emphasis on labour reform, saying Korea's future could be shaped in the coming 3 to 4 years. Choi Sun reports.
Emphasizing structural reform as the key to shoring up Korea's new growth engines, President Park said her priority is revamping the country's rigid labor market. With the youth unemployment rate surpassing 10%, the president sought public support for a wage peak system of reducing wages for older workers to hire more young people.
저는 청년 일자리 문제를 해결하는 것이야말로 우리 사회를 건강하게 만드는 토대이자 저출산 문제를 해결하는 핵심적인 열쇠라고 생각합니다.
President Park then called for fairness and flexibility in the labor market, determining employment and wages based on a worker's abilities and achievements, not job security or how long he or she has been employed.
청년들에게 더 많은 일자리를 제공할 수 있도록 대기업과 고임금 정규직들이 조금씩 양보와 타협의 정신을 발휘해 줄 것을 간곡히 당부드립니다.
The president also vowed to implement the wage peak system in all public institutions this year, saying she expects to see 8,000 new jobs in 2 years. Prompting labor and management to resume negotiations with the government on labor reforms, President Park promised to raise unemployment benefits to 60% of a person's average wage and help the unemployed find jobs. In other areas, the president pledged to unify redundant public sector projects, expand a program that gives students a semester free of exams to foster creativity, and remove the corporate protectionism in the financial sector. President Park said it is the public that stands at the center of state affairs and only they can bring about changes and improvements to the country. She then urged the entire nation to join hands and share the burden for everyone's coexistence and prosperity. Choi Sun, Arirang News.
Now, following the president's address, Korea's rival political parties, as well as representatives from the management and labour sectors, issued their reactions to her speech, and they varied in tone, as you might expect. Park Ji-won has the details.
After hearing President Park's vision for the second half of her presidency, the ruling Saenuri Party vowed to fully support her drive to reform the labor, public and financial sectors, as well as the education system.
With President Park Geun-hye, the Saenuri Party will commit to completing the reform of the 4 major sectors that will determine the country's future.
The spokesperson also said the party shares the president's sense of urgency about making the labor market more flexible to create more jobs for young people. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy Party took a different view. The party's spokesperson said the speech was full of instructions, but there were no words of apology for the government's poor initial handling of the MERS outbreak or the surveillance allegations surrounding the spy agency. He said reforming Korea's family-run conglomerates is a more pressing issue than shaking up the labor market.
Given the messy feud over control of Lotte Group, what is most urgent is reforming the conglomerates. The president, however, did not suggest any measures for improving their outdated management structures and instead shifted all the responsibility for the nation's economic failings onto the labor market.
The Korea Employers Federation welcomed the president's plan to make the labor market more flexible. In a statement, the federation said the president's prediction that reforming the labor market will lead to the more jobs for young people is accurate. Conversely, the Federation of Korean Trade Unions, representing the labor sector, urged the administration to not force workers to make any more sacrifices and said the government should focus on improving Korea's skilled labor structure, infamous for having some of the longest working hours in the world. It said what is needed at this point is for companies to hire more people, pointing to the internal reserves of Korea's 30 top companies, which reached a combined $610 billion during the first quarter. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye is expected to pardon some well-known corporate leaders in time for Korea's Liberation Day next weekend. The Justice Ministry is preparing a list and it's expected to be finalized next Thursday during a cabinet meeting led by the president. The move is in line with her efforts to revive the economy and boost public morale. The politicians aren't expected to be included, but many people will receive amnesty for less serious offences such as traffic violations. SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won and his brother and Vice Chairman Choi Jae-won, as well as Hanwha Group Chairman Kim Seung-yeon, all serving sentences for embezzlement and dereliction of duty, are likely to be pardoned. President Park's spokesperson on Thursday refused to be drawn on the people who might be on that list. The Korean government has rolled out a plan to revise the country's tax code. It's hoped the changes will go some way to stimulating the sagging economy as it continues to suffer from faltering exports and the recent MERS outbreak. Shin Se-min reports.
Armed with a plan to rewrite the country's tax code on top of its recent stimulus injection worth around $10 billion, the Korean government is going all in to prop up growth. Under the revised tax code, the finance ministry says both domestic and foreign companies will be eligible for tax deductions that encourage them to hire more young people. Small and mid-sized businesses will get a tax break of over $4,000 for every new young worker they hire and $21,000 for large firms. The measure goes hand in hand with the government's efforts to ease the youth unemployment rate, which stood over 10% at the end of June, while the overall unemployment rate is just below 4%. The finance ministry also said it will offer taxpayers an individual savings account, or ISA, starting next year. The new scheme allows ordinary workers and businessmen to pile up financial assets at lower tax rates with the hope to save the account holders some $470 million. Although the tax law revision plan is expected to raise the annual tax revenue by roughly $930 million, concerns still linger over the country's fiscal soundness.
It won't be enough to reduce the growing fiscal debt because collecting more money from high-income earners and large companies will only help in the short term. Raising the wages of ordinary workers will have a greater impact down the road.
Stressing the need for structural reforms, the expert says the implementation of wage peak system and raising the wages for ordinary workers should come first in order to collect enough taxes. With the proposed tax law revisions, the government wraps up all its stimulus plans for the latter half of the year. Now, the question is whether the government measures will be enough to prop up the crumbling economy. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, South Korea's former First Lady Lee Hee-ho, who is on a humanitarian trip to North Korea, will visit cultural heritage sites on this Friday, the third day of her four-day visit to the communist state. Lee, who arrived at Myeohyangsan Mountain in Pyeongbuk-do province late Thursday, is scheduled to visit the International Friendship Exhibition Center and Bohyonsa Buddhist Temple, as well as other historical sites located around the mountain. It remains to be seen, however, whether the widow of former President Kim Daejungs will meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un during her stay. She will spend the night at a hotel on the side of the mountain before returning to South Korea on a chartered flight on Saturday morning. North Korea's top diplomat has slammed the United States, saying Washington is aiming to destroy his country. Lee Soo-young made the comments on Thursday on the sidelines of the ASEAN Regional Forum in Malaysia. Won Ji-yeon reports.
The 22nd Regional Security Forum of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, kicked off on Thursday in Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia. The forum, which brings together top diplomats from 27 countries, is known to be one of the rare international events that North Korea attends every year. This year's meeting was also important in that it included all members of the six-party talks for denuclearization. However, on the sidelines of the event, the isolated regime lashed out at the United States. At a press conference on Thursday, Lee Dong-il, a spokesman for North Korea's Foreign Minister Lee Soo-young, said Pyongyang has no choice but to keep its nuclear programs to protect itself from U.S. hostility. In English, Lee said that the future of North Korea's nuclear program will all depend on the attitude of the United States and that the U.S. is hell-bent on eliminating the communist regime. Lee also blamed the joint military drills between Seoul and Washington as another reason for Pyongyang to keep its nuclear program. He warned that if the U.S. continues to expand its military presence in the Asia-Pacific region, a second Korean War will be inevitable. With that, it seems like North Korea's nuclear programs will continue to raise tensions in the region. Meanwhile, at a separate meeting of foreign ministers on Wednesday, South Korea's Yoon Byung-se asked for constant support from the ASEAN member nations to prevent North Korea's possible provocations in the future. Won Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The waters are becoming more choppy between the world's two superpowers. The United States says it can no longer tolerate China's efforts to militarize the South China Sea. Speaking at the ASEAN Regional Forum on Thursday, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry called on all claimants to stop further land reclamation and construction of new facilities on disputed features. The forum was dominated by Beijing's rapid expansion of reefs and construction of military posts in the South China Sea over the last 18 months or so. Kerry, who had earlier in the day agreed to cooperate with Japan on maritime issues, said the construction of such facilities threatened peace in the area. Now, on Wednesday, prior to the meeting between Kerry, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi had announced that land reclamation in the South China Sea had already stopped. The US official said he hoped that was true, but other envoys at the ASEAN Forum refuted Wang's claims. A panel advising Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on his upcoming World War II anniversary statement is known to have generally stood in favor of mentioning the country's wartime aggression against other Asian countries. Tokyo-based Kyodo News Agency reported Thursday that Deputy Chairman of the 16-member panel, Shinichi Kitaoka, said only 2 members oppose the idea of using the word aggression in the statement. In regards to issuing an apology, the officials said the panel was not in a position to comment on the Prime Minister's words or actions, adding that it was not the panel's role to urge him to include an apology. Abe has said that he will use the panel's advice as a reference in drawing up his statement to mark the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. He's expected to issue that statement on August 14th. Now, people born with genetic diseases often have to endure the conditions for their entire life without much hope of ever getting any better. And one of those diseases is hemophilia. But Korean scientists say they may have found a way to fix the disorder by correcting the gene causing it in the first place. Song Ji-sun reports.
Hemophilia is a genetic disease that causes patients to bleed uncontrollably as their blood lacks coagulating agents that regulate blood clotting. Over 400,000 people suffer from this disease in the world, and there is currently no cure for the disorder. Hemophilia A is the most common form of the disease. It's caused when an inversion of a particular gene occurs at birth. However, in a possible breakthrough, Korean researchers have found a way to fix this irregularity. Using a type of genetic scissors, scientists cut the inverted gene and correct it so it takes the right position. They then transplant the gene into cultivated stem cells. Tested on mice, those given the fixed gene live twice as long as those without it.
Nearly half of all hemophilia patients suffer from severe symptoms, and half of them have the disease because this gene is inverted. We believe this technique could be applied to other forms of the disease that are derived from a similar mutation.
While many more studies need to be done, clinical research on humans could begin within the next 10 years. The gene correction procedure could replace the medication-based treatment for hemophiliacs, which requires regular injections throughout a patient's lifetime. The research was published in the July online edition of Cell Stem Cell. 송지선, Arirang News.
Well, those are the stories we have for you on this Friday morning here in Seoul. We do hope you have a wonderful weekend, and thank you as always for tuning in. Goodbye.